Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
All right. I'm letting our viewers know a little bit about you. So I
Okay.
was telling them, and I was impressed that you have been a teacher in France, in Spain, in the UK. Is that so?
That's
Yeah?
true. Yes.
All right. Mike was also head of Redland School in Chile for at least 7 years, I believe.
That's right. It was 6 years, yeah.
6 years, okay. And there he was involved in staff recruitment and retention, building program, union board liaison. He was also he's being an active member of Association of British Schools in Chile, as well as in FIDE, which is a Chilean educational association. And you happen to be also the director of the bilingual program for Cognita schools, the Pumawe Manquecura schools, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, well, here we are to talk about a very challenging topic. Um, I want to remind our viewers, Mike, that they can always invite some other people to join us right now by simply clicking on this airplane icon down here. So, dear viewers, you can do that right now if you feel like someone might want to join us. And I had a challenge, Mike, for the rest of the people. I removed the first word in this quote, and now they were trying to guess.
Okay.
And here it goes again. It says, it goes, XX is the most valuable and respected quality of leadership. Always keep your word. So people have been trying to guess what the word was, and that word missing there is integrity. Integrity is the most valuable and respected quality of leadership. Always keep your word. Mike, what do you think about this first quote for today?
Well, integrity, it's interesting. Further down in the conversation, I was looking at leadership and qualities and all those kind of things. And I was thinking of world leaders at the moment and who stands out and who doesn't, and head teachers that we admire and who we don't. And certainly one of the things very high up will be integrity. So I fully coincide with that thought. I want
Okay.
to thank you, Joaquín. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this. It's very interesting. When you gave me a title a few weeks ago and you said kind of leadership of teams in crisis, I thought, well, leadership, I know a few things about that. Teams, a few things about that. And crises, bits and pieces. But it sounded a good topic. So I'm very pleased you invited me. And I thank you for the introduction as well. That's very nice.
Okay. Okay. So this thing about leadership in education, for some reason, Mike, well, we all know, those of us who work in education, we know the two words should sometimes go together, but there are not many chances, many places where we can meet and discuss about educational leadership as such. So we know that you have been in leadership positions, leading positions in different institutions. So that's why we thought of this topic for you to share with us. Could you probably well, we'll start with some questions I have for you, and then we want to invite also our viewers to
Yeah,
write some of their own questions, so that
yeah.
maybe you could answer them. So what is your background in relation to educational leadership?
Right. If I give you a 1 minute history of me, last year I was working for Cognita in charge of their bilingual program in the 14 schools they have here. I was also working with the Universidad Chilena Británica, offering some leadership courses. Before that, I was in Redland School here in Santiago for 6 years as the head. And before that, I was in Mexico for 20 years before coming to Chile. And previous to that, I had some time in France and Spain. And in England, I started teaching French and Spanish, then slowly changed roles and moved into head of department type thing and head of pastoral care. So that's been my background, if you like. The last year has been very strange for me, really. The last 6 or 7 months, as it has for everybody. But it's the first time in my life when I haven't been working. So it's been interesting. So for the last 6 months, I haven't just sat at home. Well, I have been at home, actually. But I've had a chance to do many things, but to maintain interest in education because my wife, Kate, she is head of a primary school in Lobarnechea. Her office is behind this wall here, and she's working now. So I'm fully aware of all the work that's going on a day-to-day basis and the problems there are. I was very lucky last year. One of my good friends here in Santiago, Daryl, he got the headship of a school in Antofagasta. And the board and he kindly invited me to give a hand with the development. So I was up in Antofagasta for quite a while last year, and that was nice. And I've maintained the contact with them. And then when you have been in teaching a long time, you make lots of friends, colleagues. And so, as you suggested at the start, with the ABS, the Associated British Schools, a couple of schools have been in touch with me. Latin American Heads Conference, some of the schools there have been in touch. My 20 years in Mexico, particularly at the Colegio Británico, Ederon, I've been in touch with them, and that's been nice. So I've been able to maintain contact with people to know what's going on. And the other thing I'd like to mention is that you ask in a way, how can we link and learn about educational leadership? Again, I was lucky in a way to join a course that was run by Cambridge University. It was a professional development qualification, PDQ, and it took a year, and I passed that and enjoyed it, and it was on educational leadership. And then the next year I thought, well, I like this, so I learned how to teach that program. And this year I'm thinking how on earth I can offer it here in Chile. So in terms of linking educational leadership with people, it's a way forward. I'm sure there are lots of other ways forward, but it's a way that seems interesting and it's challenging, but it relates very much to the workplace as well. It's not a theoretical course. So it's interesting.
So probably this interview would be like a good starting point for things that would come, I mean, I don't know, might come afterwards, right?
Exactly.
Right. So apparently you've taught in different countries and you've been connected to leadership, to educational leadership in different countries. And in a way that gives you like a broader view of, you know, what's going on in educational leadership. And maybe this might be an interesting question at this point. How is leadership run differently or similarly in Chile to other countries?
Yes. I mean, I think if I think back to England, for example, the head teacher of a school was called the head teacher. So it wasn't a rector, it wasn't the director educativo, it wasn't any of that. It was a head teacher. And that defined what the role was, that you were in charge to make sure there was good teaching and learning. And therefore, you were able to dedicate your time to that, and you had a group of people around you who looked at all the other things that needed to happen. So you did have some administration people, you had other people to help. But that was one big difference, that in England, certainly, the head teacher was in charge of the most important thing in a school, which is the teaching and learning. But he had other people to look after other aspects of school life, if you like. I think as you move to different countries, it depends on what section of the population you're working with. In Mexico, when I arrived there, we had a very broad leadership team. We had a board who allowed us to actually manage the school, and the team there, a very competent and nice team, and we were allowed to get on with our business with a board that was above us and could tell me, look, Mike, you're going in the wrong direction. They got the rights to do that, but they let us get on with running the school. Here in Chile, I came to Chile 8 years ago now, so I was 6 years at Redland, which was a wonderful school. I really enjoyed myself there. And again, you were allowed to run the school, but, for example, my job description at Redland, when I read it first of all, I was in charge of 23 areas, and each area had about 5 sub-areas. So in theory, I was in charge of 100 things, which was impossible, and you don't have the expertise anyway. Now, that's the same in any schools. I'm not picking out Redland for that. I'm just saying that was, as a head, you were in charge of getting all these things done. And therefore, here in Chile, the answer was and is teamwork, that the head cannot be in charge of everything, cannot know enough or have time for enough things. So there was a big difference in terms of here realising that although you've got the responsibility for virtually everything, it does need devolving, and it's accepted that as well. So that was my experience at Redland School, certainly.
No, that's interesting. Now that you mentioned that apparently in Chile there are a lot of areas that a head teacher or a director has to cover. Now I'm trying to think of, the current situation. The current situation. For some reason, we know that we have what we call the first line, right? The doctors and nurses, but we have this other first line as well. Teachers have probably been a group that have been under a lot of pressure, a lot of demands on the part of parents and probably the schools. And then we have the heads of school that have to also take responsibility, right? So they must probably also be under a lot of pressure. So what are your thoughts on leadership, especially in these times?
Well, if I take that a bit more globally to start with, and I think I look at the world leaders that we look at on television all day long. And on the one hand, you've got characters like Bolsonaro, you've got Trump, you've got Johnson, you've got López Obrador. And on the other hand, you've got a number of, for example, the people in charge of countries like New Zealand and Germany and Iceland and Norway, who all happen to be women. Again, it's fascinating seeing the styles of leadership that we're seeing in these days. And later on, they'll obviously be judged. There'll be a lot of research on this. Now, referring that back to schools, I think that school leaders these days do have a tremendous burden, a tremendous amount of work to do. And one of the things that I've found interesting is trying to think of our own leadership style. What is our leadership style? And all of us have got a style that we feel comfortable with. So our natural style when we're making decisions is X. It might be autocratic, it might be democratic, whatever. And I think it's important to think about that these days, because if your normal style is whichever, you've got so many situations that are complicated to deal with that you've got to be ready to change this style and realise that every situation needs a different style of management. I think as well, you've got people looking at you that are expecting many things from you. I think the general public or parents, in terms of a head teacher, for example, in broad terms, I think they're looking for 2 or 3 things, and they're simple. They're looking, I think, for someone who seems to know where they're going, has got some kind of goal. Even with this virus now, there's some kind of goal, there's a way forward. They're looking for someone who can take people with you. So they're leaders, and they're able to take people with them. I think they want someone who's got experience, so someone who appears to know what they're doing. And particularly in these times, I feel that trust, you mentioned integrity, it was interesting because earlier on, and it comes back to this now, to be honest, I think when you start looking at the kind of heads or people in positions of this nature, the ones who are doing well are people who've got the trust of people, are honest, are very clear and transparent. They make decisions, but they explain them and the whys. And not everyone's going to agree with them, but at least can understand them. And their communication is brilliant. So those are the kind of qualities I would hope to look for in heads. And I think the kind of questions I'd be asking myself, if I was a head now of a school, I'd be saying to myself, am I giving time to myself? Am I finding time? Is school consuming me 100%? And if it is, that's not a good thing. So am I somehow finding outlets for myself? Am I allowing my teams to work? Or am I interfering to make sure they're doing a good job? Am I interfering too much? Am I giving people too much stress? Am I actually appreciating people? Am I listening to people? All of those questions would be one that as a leader I'd want to be asking myself at the moment and answering them and asking people how they feel I'm doing, so that it's not just me, there's a feedback. I think all of these things are important in headship and leadership. The other point that hasn't come out yet so far is that when I think of leadership, I think of all of us in schools as leaders. So, okay, we've got a hierarchical system and we've got a head at the top, okay, and that's necessary and good. But I think everybody has a role in leadership in schools. So whether you are the head teacher, whether you're the senior leadership, whether you're professor jefe, whether you are convivencia, whether you're the secretary, we've all got different roles in leadership. And that's important as well, that people realise that they've got a role to play. There were a couple of other points. I've been thinking about this question as well. There were a couple of other things that came to mind, and one was something about authentic leadership, that you're actually true to yourself, that basically you think to yourself, what do I stand for? What's important to me in my professional life, in education? And it could be honesty, it could be academic excellence, it could be punctuality is the most important thing, and okay, and you are true to that and you maintain that and people know that and they feel comfortable with it. And I think not all leaders have to be the same, but I think people hopefully want people who keep to their standards. The other thing I was thinking the other day was that people who've not exactly influenced me, but I've listened to, I mean, Mandela, he's used for so many things, isn't he, Mandela, because he's such a personality, a character. But his view of leadership was very much seeing people very much as a shepherd, and he was guiding them in the right direction. And that, again, is a nice way of, it appeals to me anyway, it's a nice way of seeing things. Problem with leadership these days is there's so much literature on it that, you know, you look at styles of leadership and there's about 30 different styles, and it's overwhelming. You can't take all that in. So you need to kind of reduce it. And there was a British actor called Ben Walden, and he broke it down brilliantly. He used to do Shakespeare plays, and he came out to Chile a couple of times, and he looked at Macbeth, for example, or Henry V, and he said, look, in their leadership, these people, you've got a king who is ideally a good man. He's in respect. He's respected by everybody. He's on high, and he makes decisions, and people obey them. And then you've got three other characters who there's a caring queen, somebody who looks after people. And again, in education, it refers brilliantly. It's saying basically you've got someone who says, look, the only thing that matters is relationships. That you get on with the kids, you get on with the staff, you get on with the parents, and then the school's going to work. You've got a warrior as well as somebody who fights for everything, who believes inclusion is the thing, and people go with him. And you've got these four characters, and what he's saying is that within a school setup, you need to form those characters. If you have naturally in your senior leadership team 4 kings, that's complicated because you're not going to be able to fulfill the other roles and things like that. I think it's a good time at the moment to think of how your teams and how you as a leader are working. So I think it is complicated, as you suggested at the moment, and it's even more complicated by not being with people. So I think leaders need to analyse themselves, not in detail, but think, how am I leading, and get feedback as well as to how things are going. Does that answer your question?
I've been thinking, now that you mentioned this, leaders wondering and then questioning themselves at times. Someone said once that a leader takes people where, a typical leader takes people where they want to go, but a great leader is someone who takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be.
That's very nice. Yes.
Now, how to do that? How to do that?
Yes. I think that there was another form of leadership which relates very much to that, which encourages people to go in the direction you want them to go, but at the end they feel they have actually achieved the goal, not you. And it's quiet leadership, it's called. And it's another one that's appealing. It's been around for years, so it's not new. But the idea is that, yes, you as a leader decide the school needs to go this way. And you find ways to manage it so that people do go that way, and they feel that they have actually made the decision to move in that way, and they own the change as well. And you sit there at the back and have conducted this, if you like. Now, that all sounds very good. How do you do it? And I think part of it does come back to the leadership qualities we were mentioning early on. You need to win people's confidence. People aren't going to listen to you if you're not going to listen to them, for example. People need to feel listened to. They need to feel part of the organisation, I think. I think there is the possibility that as a hierarchical system, you're at the head, you're at the top, and people follow you because that's what they do. Now, that works for a little bit. But if you really want to take people with you, I think they've got to participate and feel part of the organisation and trust you and feel that they can make decisions, that when you do have meetings and you do delegate, you do actually delegate, and you accept that mistakes are going to be made because things are not necessarily going to be done as you would do them. But that's okay. Right. If broadly things are moving in the direction you want, you're accepting that there are one or two things that are not going to go perfectly, and that's okay. So I think those are some of the answers to that. It doesn't answer it completely, I know, but it gives a flavour.
Right. Listen, I want to remind our viewers they can send not only comments, but they could also send questions, and feel free, please, to send questions that Mike might be willing to answer. We have a couple of fans here expressing their thoughts about your leadership. We have Andrea Blind, who says that Mike is by far the best head I have ever worked with. Wow, that's a good memories they have of your work. Okay. And then we have Ro Suarez. Great job. Oh, that's for Neuroeduca. Thanks for all the interviews you're doing so far. All right. Well, this is interesting. In times, there's an author who says that in difficult times, what you see is what becomes transparent is the character of people. It's not that it's being tested, but it becomes transparent. Okay, you can really see it. What do you think about? What elements should a leader take into consideration these days? Now that we're, facing this worldwide crisis, And particularly speaking of schools, there might be some leaders, some coordinators, some head teachers who are listening to us today, and they might be wondering, okay, but what elements should I consider if, I mean, while we, you know, we move on in the middle of the crisis?
Yes. I mean, I thought about this. I thought, again, if I were ahead at the moment, what would be the things that I would be wanting to be managing now? What would be the areas I'd be wanting me and my teams to be looking at? And I think there are, I'm sorry, there's lots, but I think they come down to three from my point of view. One,
three, okay.
Yeah, just three. I mean, one is looking at mistakes. That we all make mistakes, and this coronavirus here now has gone on for 4 months. It suddenly happened, and we had to react quickly, all of us, and therefore mistakes inevitably were made. Now, I think that we do need to think of these mistakes, partly so that if we can correct them now, we can, but also while we remember them, because if not, we're going to forget them, and we think of strategies. I think with mistakes, here in Chile, for example, we've had, 5 months of the coronavirus, and before that, we had 3 or 4 months of the unrest, the social unrest. And again, it's interesting, what mistakes did we make as schools in that time? Now, we did many fantastic things, so I'm aware of that, but we made mistakes. If we think back even further, I mean, when there was 9/11, when 9/11 happened, I can remember there were interviews with there was 3,000 teachers after, about 8 months after, and they said, look, and they all agreed more or less, they said, look, since the incident of 9/11, we haven't been able to concentrate on our lessons. We've never finished the program, the curriculum just almost disappeared. Our life at home has been complicated, so we haven't been able to concentrate on school. And things of that nature after a crisis are things we could be thinking about when we get back to school. So teachers might be feeling all of these stresses. I think we also need to, so one thing is thinking of the mistakes that we have made or others have made, and we learn from them. There's a positive side to this, because that sounds a bit negative. There's a positive side in that we think of how can we take advantage of all the positive things that we have been doing in the last 3, 4, 5 months? And there are lots and lots of positives that we should go back to schools with. And we as leaders and teams need to think, well, how on earth do we manage that? And if I give you an example of the kind of positives I'm thinking of, even our style of teaching. I mean, we've been teaching from distance now. Ideally, we want to be back at school with the kids, and relationships are really important. But the way we've taught, probably we've been planning incredibly well. We tell our objectives really clearly. We manage projects with the children. They do research because they have to, because they're at a distance. Yes. Some of these things are fantastic. We let the children plan their own education to an extent. And those kind of things, it would be lovely if we were able to take back to schools and use. I think another thing that would be really nice, but I see it as complicated, in terms of narrowing the gap. When we think of schools that have got a lot more money than other schools, and that's true around the world, that's not here in Chile necessarily, but okay, we've got schools that have got a lot more money. Some of these other schools are suffering, and in this pandemic, certainly did at Kate's school, my wife's school, in terms of learning from distance, it couldn't happen because they just didn't have the equipment. In terms of phones, they probably had phones, but in terms of really being able to connect with the teachers, it took a long, long time. And there were other priorities at home. There was food, there was where could you settle down to work. There were lots of things there. And so I think to myself, when we finally get back to schools, what can we do? Are there ways that we can link schools? Even in our own school, can we make sure that all of the students have the same benefits? Because even in one school, there are some children that don't have the same benefits at home as others do. So probably this narrowing the gap would be nice. It'll be a good thing. The use of technology, I mean, I'm not the best person to talk about technology, to be honest, but the actual use of technology, everyone's knowledge has increased tremendously, and there have been some tremendous benefits So let's make sure when we go back to school, we take advantage of these, we maintain them, we use technology sensibly. So
Right. Well,
some of those.
that's interesting, the three different points you mentioned. And I have to tell our viewers that I've seen you work with technology. So you have, yes, you have given me good examples of becoming flexible, okay? Becoming flexible. And we know we have that mental capacity to adapt to new situations. We have a viewer, Pipe Martinez. He's asking, how can we thrive resilience when working with colleagues?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Yes. How can we thrive resilience, maybe promote resilience when working with colleagues?
Yes.
Because there must be teachers who either on a personal area or professional one, they are, undergoing difficult moments. So how to, support them in a way as a leader?
Yes. It's a good question. I think that with teams, for example, I listen to the number of meetings that people are having at the moment is enormous. And I think there's a couple of points with teams and when you're running teams, or just talking to colleagues, not necessarily as a team basis. But I think one thing is to empathise. We need to empathise tremendously with the people in the team when we start a meeting or a conversation. Rather than start with point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's just say to each other, how are you? How are you getting on? How's your granddad? How's life? So I think that's important. In terms of building resilience, I think building the relationship first is important. And I think by asking about the person, how they're getting on and whatever, I think then validating what they say. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything. Many things you hear, you probably think, God, that's terrible. I don't agree with that at all. But you don't need to say that. You could say, thank you very much. I appreciate your point. Let's consider it and we'll bear it in mind, something of that nature. And after the meeting, I think to get back in touch with the person, say, look, I really did enjoy that meeting with you. Thanks ever so much. And I'm glad you brought up the point of whatever. But I think in terms of building strength and resilience, first of all, people have got to feel confident that they're doing a reasonable job. And so we need to encourage them and say, yeah, you're doing okay, you're doing well, etc. And I think we need to ask their opinion on things, that their opinion is important. Resilience is a difficult, thing to answer this person's question. I think resilience has a lot to do with building relationships and strengthening relationships so they feel validated and part of, and their participation is important. And to pick out a few things they've done well. I'm sure there's thousands of things they haven't done well, but there will be things that you can say, look, you did a great job there, thanks ever so much, that was great. And that will, in itself, build that up. I know that's not a perfect answer, but there's some thoughts.
Great, yes, thank you. And this takes us into another area now. Mike, we know we would not have leaders if we didn't have the people to be led. So, speaking of teamwork now, what are the benefits of teamwork and how to maximize its use?
Good. I like the question because I like teams. I think the first thing to recognise with teams is that they can be terrible. So I think you need to understand the disadvantages of working with teams as well. One disadvantage is they can be tremendously time wasting. The amount of time that you spend writing an agenda, minutes, action plan, all of these things takes time. And I think teams at times don't understand whether they are decision making or not. So a group of people come together, discuss something, reach a conclusion, think a decision has been made, and it hasn't, because it wasn't a decision-making team. So I think there are problems to start with.
That's quite an issue. That's an issue. We are in Latin America. That's an issue. Right.
Exactly. But I do think teams are vital for many things. One, the head can't do everything anyway, as we said before. But more than that, you want people to participate. People want to participate, and you want them to participate, and they've got huge expertise. Their professionalism is tremendous. So the question, in a way, is how to get the right people in the right team doing the right things. And that's an interesting one. There were two, they weren't necessarily authors, but I remember a team meeting a long time ago doing a bit of work in Mexico on this and at Redland. And I mean, it's old hat in a way because this was produced in 1990. But I did check the other day, and it is still being used by businesses, so it can't be that bad.
Right.
And it was Belbin who had he had 9 characteristics of a successful team, and he explained these. And he said, right, if you want a good team, you need these kind of 9 people. Now, you don't always have 9 people in a team, obviously. So if I've only
or at least the main characteristics or the characteristics in the team.
That's right. And so, for example, there would be somebody who would be a completer finisher, somebody who made sure that having made a decision, right, you're going to do this, you're going to do it by then, you're going to do it by then. Good. So you had somebody who did that, for example. You had somebody who was a researcher who said, right, I'll go and check. You had somebody who cared for the team, who looked after people during the meeting and did things, etc. Now, I can't remember all of them, but basically we took that as a model and our senior leadership team based it on that. And it was a little bit phony in that, you know, today I'm going to be this kind of character and you're not normally that character, but it did give you an idea, it helped. The other person was De Bono, who had his thinking hats. And again, this is...
I was just thinking of the Bono and his technique, the strategy of the thinking hats.
So you put your green hat on, and you're going to be creative, etc. And it sounds a little bit false, but it's surprising, works, and it's a bit of fun. So even now, as people tomorrow or Friday are phoning up their teams, just playing with that and saying, right, today I want you to be creative, I want you to do this, you do this, let's try it and see if it works. And maybe it fails tremendously, and all right, nothing's lost, but maybe it works.
Right, why not? Why not try it? Right.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly, yeah. The other thing, I mean, in terms of teams, I would be asking myself a number of questions about teams. I'd be saying to myself, do we really need so many meetings? Again, thinking of my wife here, I think probably she's had 8 meetings today. Now, I don't know that, but they're all Zoom, so it's all hectic, and if she's doing that, then thousands of people around the country are doing the same. So it's nothing, rare. But do we need those meetings? Were the objectives of the meetings ever clear? At this meeting we're going to do this, and it could be just a social meeting. That's okay, but let's say it's a social meeting. Have we got the right people in this meeting? Do we really need all 6 of you, or could we just have 3? So I think those kind of questions to use people's time efficiently, and they don't feel they're on the go all day with meetings. They need some time to actually do other work. So I think that's
especially today that everything is through the screens and through the Zoom, and people,
Well, the other thing with meetings, I think, and as leaders, I think we need to learn to evaluate, or to say, how can we support our people, and who is under stress? We're all under stress, different kinds of stress. Okay. How do we recognise that in our Zoom meeting, and what can we do about it? If we've got, and it's not that complicated either. I mean, if we've got somebody who naturally joins in everything and he's incredibly quiet, or somebody who is very strong at a meeting and normally is a bit more placid, there are little signs there, and we need to follow it up and check they're okay and be okay. So I think we need to support our teams in that way. When I was saying earlier on that meetings, that everyone is a leader, it does apply all the way down. That if we've got a head of the police at the gates, the head there, well, he needs to look out for his team. Are there in the kitchens? Well, we haven't got kitchens at the moment, but each kind of group in school needs to think, is my team okay? Are people okay? How can I help? You're looking a bit flat at the moment. Anything wrong? I think it's something in this pandemic that has been a tremendous strength, that people do seem to be looking after each other generally a lot more. Where I live, talking downstairs to the concierge, you know, are you okay? Your family, you got here okay? Yeah. And there's a lot more of that going on, and we need to maintain it.
Oh, that's good then. So it's bringing up something good after all.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think we've got to be optimistic as well. I mean, that was another characteristic of a good leader that I never mentioned anywhere. But I think if we're not optimistic as leaders, well, that's going to be complicated.
Exactly.
I think what goes with that is a sense of humour as well. I think we don't want to lose that either. I think people need to smile as well these days.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you mentioned the pandemic, and you mentioned the well, becoming optimistic. We all want to see that day when they will allow us to return to normal life in a way, to return to schools.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that, what would be some specific areas that leadership and teams might be considering or should be considering preparing for return to school?
Good. It's a good question, because I think as a head, that will be the thing that's most in my head at the moment. You know, all these other things are really important, but are we ready to go back? If they tell me I've got to go back in 2 weeks, 2 months, whenever, are we ready? And there's 2 or 3 thoughts I've got. One is there's so much information. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. That there's so much information out there that's ready for the taking. Now, Minidug, I've listened to a number of talks that they've given, or bits of information. And, for example, all their stuff on the curriculum is clear. The new curriculum, the adapted curriculum, I suppose. Assessment, convivencia. They've given some good stuff there. But I was looking as well in England. Now, England, I don't think have managed the education or the return to schools has been very badly managed, in my opinion, in England. But one good thing they did, the Ministry of Education, it was about 3 weeks ago, that must have been more, but a few weeks ago, they gave out to heads a checklist of what they need to do before kids come back to school. And it was about 4 pages. And it seemed to me to be incredibly complete. So there was that. I think looking at schools that have already gone back in different countries, you know, what's gone well for them and what hasn't gone well for them. And again, I think to try and pick up on that. The other thing I read about, I'm trying to think where, it was in The Guardian, and it was Tom Bennett was his name, and he's a guru in England in terms of discipline and children's behaviour. That's his thing. And he was saying, look, the first thing you've got to do, don't worry too much about all the other things you're worrying about. Get the discipline right. Get the good behaviour right. Because if you don't, we're lost. Because if the kids all come back to school, you might have got all the rooms planned nicely. You might have all this perfect. But if you've got kids who are not going to do what you want, everything's going to be lost. So you've got children who've been away from school for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months. They've forgotten how to behave in school.
Yes.
Teachers who've forgotten how to teach because they've been away from teaching.
Right.
And you've got new rules. You've got the rules of distancing. You've got the rules in hygiene and washing hands and all of that. Now, with all of those changes, you've got to get your discipline right first, so people do actually do. And you do that by checking your current policy, seeing what needs adapting. Now, you might look at it and think, well, that's silly. What we do need to have is some of these rules with regard to distancing, for example. We need to explain those to children and parents and staff so everybody knows. And then you've got to have consequences. So what happens in your school in 6 months' time when a child decides not to follow the policy about distancing or whatever it is? What are you going to do? And again, that needs to be clear now. So I do think that those kind of things can be thought about. The other thing that we started off with, I think, or a while ago we mentioned anyway, was actually looking after yourself. I think you need to look after yourself and your team. And if you're not well or you're not looking after yourself, you're not going to function and it's not going to work. So as a head or as a leader in any part of the school, what are you really doing to find time just to sit and relax and to reflect maybe, or to do something different, to cook or to play your guitar or whatever it is you want to do? Are you finding time for that? And I think the trouble is when people go back to school, you suddenly get into the whirlwind of school and you don't find time for yourself. And I think it's a mistake.
Very, very interesting. Listen, Mike, time flies. It's been 50 minutes already.
Wow.
So
Gone quickly.
yeah, we've got to, start finishing. But before I give you a couple of minutes for you to round up, I want to remind our viewers that they can always get back to this interview. It's going to be uploaded to our IGTV, and they can always see it again, watch it again, or share it with their own followers on Instagram. And so would you like to take a couple of minutes to round it up and give us, I don't know, some final thoughts about leadership for this times?
Yes. I mean, what I'd like to do, I think, is to congratulate everyone who's listening. I mean, rather than go back over what I've said, I'd like to take just a minute to congratulate people for the amazing job you're doing.
Okay, apparently Mike is... Can you hear me?
I think
there?
Yeah, sorry, did I disappear?
Yes, you were like stuck. The machine your mobile was thinking.
Okay.
So you could just go over those words again?
Yeah, I mean, we all fully understand the first line, and we clap people on Fridays or Thursdays, depending where we are, and that's fantastic. But I would take a minute to clap all the teachers in education as well, because I think it's incredible the work that you are doing, considering it's work that you hadn't anticipated at all, considering the amount of time and dedication you're putting in. My first thing is to say, just a wholehearted congratulations. I'm lucky in a way, in that, as I say, I've had 6 months off. Now, in some ways, I regret that because I miss being in school, but I can see it's a headache being in a school as well at the moment. So I'd like to wish you every success, all our teachers there and all our leaders, and do, above all, find time for yourselves, find time to do other things and have a drink and forget school from time to time, because that's very healthy. And I just think all our students and parents are very, very lucky having you doing what you're doing.
Great, great. Mike, we want to thank you for having taken the challenge today. We want to wish you all the best with projects lying ahead. I'm sure that you will be back soon with some activity. You seem to be a very creative educator. And we want to thank Cambridge University Press educational partners in Chile for joining us in this live. So my last words for our viewers are always the same: stay safe, stay home if you can, and remember, as Mike suggested, be kind to yourselves and to others. Hope to meet you all again next Thursday, same time, same place. Thanks again, Mike.
That's a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye. Okay.